everybody, and welcome to the channel. In today's archive video, we have esteemed astrologer Maurice Fernandez discussing the spiritual dimension of Saturn. As always, we love to read your comments, so if you have any interesting Saturn stories, let us know how Saturn has been treating you. Do you have any planets or angles in fixed signs that Saturn has been dancing around in the last 21 months? I know Saturn has just stationed direct on my sun, so I'm certainly feeling a little lethargic. I wish I could hibernate for the next few months, but alas, I've got too much work to do. And finally, if you would like to join us for Maurice's workshop on November 4th on the eclipses, please see the link below this video in the description and the various pop-ups throughout this lecture. And without further ado, let's get into the video.
So Saturn, everybody knows about Saturn. Every school of astrology has a very comprehensive body of knowledge about Saturn. And I'd like to add this evolutionary and spiritual perspective, maybe learn new things about it, and I hope it will inspire you. So, general astronomy, Saturn is the second largest planet. It's visible in the sky, and obviously one of the 7 traditional planet that has always been considered as the outer frontier of the solar system. And even if we have discovered other bodies, the outer, transpersonal Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and then now a whole body of dwarf planets, Saturn still represents that that boundary to personal development. It represents maturity, it represents elders' wisdom. So there's something about Saturn that captures the fruits of all the labor. And this is true not just on a practical level, that you work hard and then you enjoy the fruits of your labor, but it's also on a spiritual level, how your evolutionary and spiritual development unfolds and the maturity you reach on a spiritual level as well. So it's the last planet visible before Uranus. Uranus can be visible on certain occasions when it's retrograde, opposing the sun and very close to the Earth. But it's not a consistent visual. It has many moons, and it's always interesting also to understand that the Saturn cycle is immediately correlating with the moon cycle. And I'm not talking about just its 82 moons, but I'm talking about our moon. Our moon is roughly 28-day cycle, whereas Saturn is 28-year cycle. So there's a natural correlation. They also rule opposite signs of Cancer and Capricorn. So the largest moon is called Titan, and it's an important name because in mythology, Saturn Kronos was a Titan. It was a species. It was a particular type of ruling gods. And Titan is interlocked with Hyperion, if I pronounce it right. But then there's Rhea and these others, including Prometheus, who is also a very important mythological figure. So roughly, depending on its orbit, and it's slightly eccentric. So Saturn stays 2 to 2.5 years in a sign, and as we said, roughly 29.5 years for a complete revolution. So the mythology is very important because Saturn, in our books, often, is associated with difficult experiences. And, you can hear astrologers or people who just get into astrology dreading the Saturn transits, because indeed they are, taking us on a very, very deep journey. It's an initiation, and it takes a lot out of us. It you know, it's not easy to mature. Let's put it this way. So Saturn was Jupiter's father, and Saturn was Uranus's son. So his was the natural lineage between these three. And yet there's a very, very important shift occurring in the story, in the mythology, between Saturn and Zeus, Jupiter, Kronos and Zeus. Interestingly, Saturn was the son of Uranus and Gaia, and Uranus is the lord of the heavens, and Gaia is the mother earth. So Saturn is the marriage of heaven and earth, is the product of that marriage. That's extremely important, especially for our talk today, because we tend to think of Saturn only, from the Earth perspective, and how practical and how it relates to time and to tangible results. But there's also a spiritual quality to Saturn, which is the topic of today. And part of the spiritual quality of Saturn is that Saturn relates to order and to the fact that there is order in this universe, which means that things just don't happen randomly. If someone experiences success, or wins the lottery, which seems like a luck, it's random. I lucked out. From a Saturn point of view, from that greater order point of view, it's not random. It's not, the universe is intelligent. And Saturn is, I won't say the only one that represents that universal order, but it's definitely our first introduction in the sequence of signs as we move from Aries to Taurus, then we reach Sagittarius. And what do we recognize? From Aries to Sagittarius, it's from fire to fire, the first fire sign to the last fire sign. We're pretty much in charge of our destiny. When we enter the last quadrant of the zodiac, which starts with Saturn and Capricorn, we begin to understand that life is not just about us. It's not just about what we want. And we don't make the rules. So up to Jupiter, we were making our own rules, and we were calling the shots and basically riding that horse and being proactive in the way we manifest our own destiny. And then comes Saturn and says, you have to adapt your own destiny to a larger context. Whatever you create, whatever you are, plays a role in that higher order. And the difficult aspect of Saturn is that on the one hand, we learn that there's a higher order, but we don't have a manual. So we learn about the higher order through trial and error, through sometimes challenges, through failure. The very fact that there's failure means that there is a cause and effect quality. Otherwise, if we were just living, up to Sagittarius, then we would make the rules and we would make sure we never fail, and there wouldn't be an objective mechanism that would send some kind of feedback experience that, I don't know, if you don't work properly, if you don't do what you're meant to do, if you don't do your homework, then you won't learn your lessons and you won't get certified. So that's one of the difficulties with Saturn, is that we're entering a transpersonal dimension. And this is very clear in the mythology of Saturn, because in the mythology, the time where Saturn was the ruler, where Kronos was a titan and ruling the world, really, it was considered a golden age. So, from some of the quotes, Kronos taught humanity to change their living from rude way to civilized way, and introduced them sincerity of soul, justice, and therefore people became good-hearted and guileless. No law was necessary. This golden age is described as the first age, which compelled no one, kept faith, and everyone did the right thing. Now, how so? I mean, if Saturn Kronos represents, the good-hearted and this justice and sincerity and everyone getting along, basically, how come we experience Saturn so challenging and exposing us to our weaknesses, to our blind spots, and how come basically Saturn is difficult quite often? And I'm not generalizing that, but it can be. So it seems to contradict this idea of a golden age. But what really is important, what is hiding behind this, is that Saturn represents fate. Now, if you speak about fate, you speak about something that is larger than you, that you cannot change. Like we said, we cannot change the rules of the universe. And if you go by fate, you cannot make mistakes, and therefore you cannot fail, because you're not in charge. You are just going with the flow. There is no room for error. Where do we start messing things up? When do things start to become more messy? And what is the origin of suffering? It's free will. And that's Jupiter. Now, Jupiter, had to battle his own father and became an Olympian god and became a god. Like the term Titan wasn't used with Jupiter. So he started a new legacy. And Zeus, Jupiter, was basically, from what I derive and understand, and if I kind of use these mythological stories to contextualize how we apply this to our charts. If Saturn is fate and Jupiter is free will, obviously we enjoy Jupiter more. It's easier on us, and we can push boundaries and we can, explore our potential. But with Jupiter, we also have, the risk of going too far, of overinvesting, of thinking we're right, and of pushing boundaries and doing things that are not anymore in alignment with what's right. So Jupiter is necessarily so associated with expansion, with growth, with maximizing our potential. How far can we go? How international can we reach? And basically, it's like a baby testing the parent and pushing boundaries and asserting its authority and seeing, you know, if I do that, maybe I'll get more. And if I try harder, maybe I will have better benefits. And that's how we discover our own power. You know, if you don't try something, then you don't know if you're good at it. So Jupiter is that necessity to take risk and then to realize, wow, here I'm making more money. Here I'm, you know, never thought I would write a book, and I find myself doing it. So your potential manifests, and you reap the benefits of the risk you have taken. But then, you know, Saturn in the natural order of the zodiac, at least the counterclockwise order of the zodiac, follows with Capricorn and Saturn. From free will, we move to that more fateful reality, and we realize that even though we have a degree of freedom, of free will, we are still part of a larger concept, a larger context, a greater order that is not, you know, in our control. It's not something we can modify. And this is why, you know, both Saturn and Jupiter coming together, and their cycle is a 20-year cycle. I'm going to touch on it. And, you know, we're in that year, a Saturn-Jupiter year. They're already very close to each other, but the actual conjunction will be on the 21st of December. And some of you know that they meet every 20 years in the same element for 200 years, more or less consecutively in the same element. And now in December, we're going to start a new element in transitioning from Earth to air, Aquarius. So when we speak of the golden age of Saturn, we speak of the fact that there's no room for mistake. Everything is already set in place, and we're just living life according to the higher laws, and everything's taken care of. Everything works perfectly. The moment you introduce free will, you introduce risk, and you introduce failure, and you introduce consequences. And then there's a continual dialogue between Jupiter and Saturn about how our free will must adapt to the higher will, to the higher order. And there's a constant dance because both are necessary. Now, Saturn hates Jupiter in that context because Saturn says, you know, you're messing things up. Everything was great until you came into the scene and brought free will and gave people fire through Prometheus. And now, you know, they could burn down the whole house because you gave them fire. When I was in charge, nobody, you know, felt entitled to do this kind of thing, and everything was as it should. Everybody was kind. Everybody, you know, everything was in its right place. So, that's our very gentle Saturn. So if we look at this quadrant, you know, the first quadrant is often determined by the cardinal sign, you know, Aries, I can, and Cancer starting the second, the second quadrant is where you develop your own personal will, your own personal preferences. So with Cancer, you choose what you like and what you don't like, and what you're going to do with your life, you know, through Leo and Virgo. Then through Libra and up to Sagittarius, you want more. You know, you know you can grow, and you reaching out connecting with people and transforming yourself through Scorpio, and then expanding yourself to not just in the material world, but also in the spiritual world. So through the third quadrant, you're in a constant expansion process and needing more, and how far can I go and how deep can I reach? And then you reach the fourth quadrant, which, you know, starts with Capricorn, ends with Pisces. And that's where you enter the realm of the collective, of the larger context of life, where your will needs to be integrated into a larger, higher will. And that's where, you know, the fourth quadrant is where you do not have free will anymore. You are responding to higher circumstances. It starts with higher authority. You know, we know Saturn represents teachers and governments and whoever basically has authority and decides things, legislates things, and enforces rules. So it starts in a very personal level. You know, before we dive into the spiritual, Saturn is our parents who are gods to us and tell us right from wrong and what we can and cannot do, and serve as role models. And that's our first experience of, you know, can I go to the party? Daddy and mommy said no, and that's the end of it. So you are responding to a higher body that makes decision. But on a more spiritual level, it's not just the parent; it's the cosmic parents. You know, it's that higher force, and that continues into Aquarius and Pisces, where Pisces is really the end of the cycle, where you completely how should I put it? You come to recognize that there are stronger forces of life, stronger forces of fate, stronger forces of nature. And this is why Pisces is naturally a completely passive archetype. And, you know, Pisces is about going with the flow. It is about being in alignment. And sometimes, you know, the shadow side of Pisces is that you can get hurt because you don't take action, because you're not in charge of your destiny, and you can feel as though you're losing control of your own life. But that's another subject. If we focus on Saturn, Saturn is kind of the gateway to that higher impersonal. That's another term for the fourth quadrant. It's impersonal. And so people who have a strong concentration of planets in the fourth quadrant will be people who are able to more easily navigate larger dynamics, who can work in larger corporations and work on a more public level. I'm not talking about public as in fame, though that is also part of it, but I'm talking about public as in, you know, the sum of all of us creates a result. Whereas all the way before that, you had much more of a say about the way things are going to go, and especially how your life is going to unfold. So people in the fourth quadrant can be more adaptable to those larger dynamics, but they can also feel like they're losing themselves. Who am I? You know, I never ask myself what I really want. I never ask myself, you know, what my priorities were. I just went with what people told me, or what was expected, or what was actually happening. So that is a natural balance of the zodiac. To me, the zodiac is so important to understand because we can understand life. Is there, people ask, is it fate or free will? Well, just look at the chart. It's both. There's a place for fate and there's a place for free will. It's in the zodiac. And it's encapsulated with greater concentration and stronger focus on that boundary of the MC or the fourth quadrant, the balance between Jupiter, Saturn, and Sagittarius, Capricorn. So before we dive into some of the keywords, I want to, sorry about all this, I want to go, to some of the Saturn cycles, to roughly 28 years. So age 7, we have our first Saturn square. And that's usually when we have a concept of things ending, finitude, the concept of time. And it could be a grandparent passing. It could be even parents divorcing, and then we suddenly realize that what we thought was eternal, our parents were always together, and then, if they do separate, we face the reality that things end. And then there's schooling. We usually start first grade around age 6. But age 7 is definitely a time when we become more accountable for our homework and it's a maturity phase. Another thing that often happens around age 7 is that we also start to develop greater association with the other sex parent, or I would say with the father. The father is always hopefully in the picture, but around that age, we yearn to know him better, get closer to him. So age 14, puberty, that's when we start to, we have a Saturn opposition, and we want to find our own authority. So there's external authority, there's school systems, parents, and we start to objectify our own parents and objectify our teachers. And that's when we take them down their pedestal. And we realize, well, my parents are not always right, and they don't know everything, and I can't always trust their advice. And it's a necessary phase where we can sometimes become disappointed with our parents, but the purpose is to start thinking for ourselves. So that's when the teenager start develop their own authority and start making their own decisions, and may at time how to say it, think they know everything, but importantly, that's when they want to find out things for themselves and not just take things for granted. And that's a rebellious phase. You're not, that's Saturn basically saying, wait a minute, everything was so peace and quiet and everything worked well until now, and now you're grabbing, you're defying the immaculate order, and you are causing trouble, and you're pushing boundaries. So in that Saturn opposition is also a time when you reflect on the authority. And it's also a Jupiter return phase around age 11, 12, which is really the marking point of puberty. And so both that combination of a Jupiter return and Saturn opposition gives you, the acknowledgement that you do have free will, and that you don't need to blindly obey authority. And then age 21, you, depending where you live, what kind of culture, you are either in college or you start a job or you are entering more of the adult world. Basically, you become more accountable and you have to prove that not only do you defy authority, but you also have to become accountable yourself for what you're doing and saying and creating. So you're completely out of the childhood forgivens. People are going to be more, are going to require more of you. And I'm not just talking about delivering, I'm also talking about your more moral choices. And age 28 is the Saturn return, where you review your life. So always with Saturn, you look back. When you have a strong Saturn transit on an angle or Saturn to itself, it's a time where you kind of look back and see, who am I? What have I done? Is this my life? Am I proud of what I did? Do I get credit for what I've done? So you start to reap the first harvest of your output in this world and who you are. And sometimes it can be a jumping board. It can be a promotion at work where you gain credibility, people take you more seriously, you are validated. And at other times you feel like you're a failure and you didn't do what you were, you realize that the clock is ticking and that you can't just use excuses anymore. So it's a milestone in that maturity phase. So if we look back again and understand what is this higher order that we're talking about, going back to that sense that we live in a world that is regulated. How do we know that there's a sense that things don't happen randomly? The thing with Saturn is that, like we say, you do experience failure. You do experience the consequences to your actions. If you jump off a tall building, you will hurt yourself or die. You can't change that rule. And doesn't matter, how many good intention and free will you have, this is something that's beyond you. So in a sense, if there is a higher law, how do we integrate that into our reality? How do we live by that? It gives us, just like Saturn represents the bones in our bodies and the skin, it's the framework. It's what everything else builds on. So it's the fundamental core principles that guide our lives. And you can read every scriptures, the 10 Commandments or the Bhagavad Gita or the Gospels. It's all about guidance. It's all about how to lead a meaningful and successful life. Now, like I said earlier, we're not born with a manual. How do we know what's the right thing to do? How do we know if we should, punish a child that is misbehaving, or if we should just let them learn on their own, or if we should, to what extent should we make them pay for consequences? Like, so many questions about anything in our life, how to actually manage our existence and have a good, healthy, satisfying life. So Saturn is our reference, it's our scriptures, it's what the elders have experienced. And that's another thing about Saturn. Why is it related to older people? Because these older people went through stuff and they could write in that manual, do this, don't do that. You know, we have tasted from those mistakes. This way, the new generation doesn't have to repeat all the mistakes to relearn again everything from scratch. So we're standing on the shoulders of our elders, standing on the shoulders of giants. So we're able to grow from them to the next level and not have to constantly relearn everything every morning, relearn everything with every generation. And so the elders, the Saturnian people, are kind of our keeping the records of what is good, what is not good, what is bad, what is morally good or bad, what is technically good or bad, and so forth. And so we start to actually write that manual. And this is why Saturn represents also what humans or every society or every culture will define as appropriate and inappropriate, or good or bad. What are the taboos? And what, along with that, what are the consequences? So you actually have two very important dimensions to Saturn. One of the dimension is the lower frequency, the lower expression of Saturn, which is the human-made laws, which are the laws that we derive from the experience of our elders, or the laws that derive from the sum of all our experiences. And we say, you know, don't kill. It's not a good thing. If everybody were to kill each other every time they were frustrated, we'd all be dead by now. However, when is it okay to kill? Why is there a death penalty? Are there exceptions? And so we're learning as we go, and we start to write that book of life. And the thing is, from a man-made, human-made point of view, the laws are an attempt to decode the higher spiritual laws that Saturn also gives us access to. Now, how do I know that Saturn also represents the higher order, the cosmic order, the laws of life? It's because Saturn also represents karma. And what is karma? Karma is about understanding that to each action there is a consequence, there is a reaction, which can be very Venus positive, or it can be very Venus unpleasant. So karma makes us understand that if you are out of alignment, you're going to suffer. There are going to be illnesses. There are going to be repercussions. You're going to face setbacks. And it makes us understand that this is beyond the human realm. Like, if I cheat and lie all my life, and the police never gets me, there's still karmic accountability. So there's a sense of universal justice, universal right and wrong. And this is why Saturn in our chart often represents our karmic debts. things that we did that were out of alignment. So the human laws differ according to traditions and culture and geographical positions. Like if you are in certain communities, astrology is evil and it's dangerous, and you can go to jail because you practice astrology. Or if you're an homosexual, it's a crime against humanity, and you can be thrown off a building because you're gay. Now, these are human-made laws. And you can feel guilty because you've practiced astrology, and in your society, it's wrong, and you're a fortune teller and you're misleading people. But there's a sense of, internally, that a natural intuition that tells you, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't hurt people. I'm misunderstood. I'm persecuted. And so that is that interplay between your Saturn, between what we may call natural guilt and unnatural guilt. Natural guilt is, I did hurt people, I cheated, lied, manipulated, whatever it is, and I'm accountable for that, hopefully. And if I don't, then there are going to be karmic repercussions. Unnatural guilt is when I did something that is considered wrong by my immediate society, but it's not really wrong. Like, it's unnatural to feel guilty because as a woman, I may have disobeyed my husband. Now, in some society, that's a crime, or that's an infringement. It's a moral transgression. Or if I'm a woman and I don't want to get married, and I'm going to be labeled a wild, rebellious woman, which is going to ostracize me from that culture. So whatever the context, the human-made laws are much more narrow and more primitive, if you will, than the logos. That the higher permanent sense of order that exists. And that's why Saturn represents both the karmic accountability and also the sense of persecution when we are wrongly accused in the context of society. And it can create a sense of fear of persecution. So, at the same time, when we have Saturn transits, wherever we have Saturn in our charts, is a place where we're either relearning these boundaries, and we're relearning what is the difference between man-made laws and universal laws. This is why it starts with our teenager who is going to doubt the parents and doubt the teachers and says, not everything you say, mommy, is right. And all of us have a right to do that, because there is no authority in flesh that has absolute command over universal rights and wrong. No one has access to that book of life in its entirety. So we see bits and pieces. We understand certain moral references of things we know work and things we know do not work. But at the same time, Saturn makes us want to test, is this really right and wrong? Let's say I have a Saturn transit to my Venus, and I'm married. And that Saturn, during that time, no, let me rephrase that. I have a Saturn-Venus transit, and I'm falling in love with a woman who is married. Now, she tells me her marriage is not working, and she's staying there because of the kids. So from a Saturn point of view, I have a moral dilemma. And I have to find out what's the right thing to do. Should I just leave it and say it's wrong? She's married. You know, it is not right for me to pursue this. Or am I going to say, well, but our love is real. I really care about this person. I want to be in her life. It's a you know, we don't find love every day. It's powerful, it's overpowering. What should I do? That's an example. Another example is, you know, I'm falling in love with my brother's ex-girlfriend. Is that the right thing to do? Should I date her? And so basically what I'm trying to explain here is, doesn't matter what your conclusion is, you know, what you end up thinking is right. Saturn brings these moral dilemmas. And whatever house it's going to be in, or whatever sign it's going to be in, it's going to be in those particular arena. For example, if I have Saturn in the 5th house, I may have moral dilemmas about my children, how to raise them. You know, should I let my child smoke marijuana, or should I impose boundaries? What's really the right thing to do? And if it's in the 6th house, it's going to be at work. You know, am I letting my coworkers down? So what are we really trying to do from a Saturn point of view is, what is the right thing to do? Because I know that if I do the right thing, there are going to be Saturn positive experiences. It's going to make me happy. I'm going to feel healthy. I'm going to be rewarded. The Venus is going to be happy. And if I make the wrong choices, then there are going to be setbacks. And of course, we know that from a human perspective, because we're still in these murky waters trying to find out what's right, what's wrong, in our world, there are many gray lines because we don't have full perspective, because we don't see beyond time. You know, we're not in that fully enlightened consciousness to have absolute clarity, where it's very clear what's appropriate and not. So in our human condition, as we do go through trial and error, there are gray lines and there are murky areas where I don't know what's right or wrong. And in a very typical Saturn way, we also preach and tell people, oh, this is so wrong. How, you know, you're a terrible parent. Your kids are, you know, wasting their potential, until it reaches you. And then you face, you know, your own shadow, realizing that you thought you were the perfect parent. You thought you had everything figured out. And you realize that even though, you know, you thought you were the perfect parents, your kids are now dropping out of school and they're unhappy and maybe facing some consequences. So Saturn is humbling. You know, it tells you to, on the one hand, make that judgment call and find out what's right and wrong, but at the same time, have tolerance for our human condition, tolerance for mistakes. And this is why, as Saturn can be so rigorous, it is also about, Saturn does represent forgiveness. But forgiveness with accountability. It's not freebies. You have to earn your forgiveness, the same way you have to earn your status and you have to earn your respect. Where, Saturn is constantly testing you. But in many cases, and you will see spiritual teachers that are heavily Saturnian, such as Osho. He's a Saturn in Capricorn, and I think Moon in Capricorn, and heavy Capricornian signatures. And one of the premises of Osho, if you follow some of his teaching, is that guilt is the root cause of every problem in society. Because people feel guilty for things that are not naturally wrong. It's just cultural conditioning. And if you free yourself from that conditioning, you can free your spirit and you can really tap into divine whatever. And so he had a lot of programs in place to overcome guilt, to free yourself from, the traditional Catholic, Jewish, Muslim, conventional religious condemnations, and don't masturbate and you'll go to hell if you think those thoughts. And yet the other extreme of never feeling guilty is what we call being a sociopath, where you hurt people and you don't feel guilty and you always justify yourself. And that doesn't work either. So guilt is a necessary emotion. It's a necessary reference, but you have to examine if it's based again on some human construct, or if it is something of a higher order. Now, how do you know? It's a big question, and that's why we're still here on this earth, going through our evolution. And sometimes we have clarity, sometimes things are revealing themselves, the truth reveals itself, and sometimes it's murky. But I want to show you some examples. So you have just a quick note on the Saturn moon cycle. Saturn is 27 to 30 years, depending on the orbit and the time you were born. Lunar cycle, sidereal cycle, which is moon return, is about 27.3 days, whereas a synodic cycle, which is new moon to new moon, going to be 29.5 days. And then the progress lunar cycle is immediately associated with the Saturn transit. So you see how the moon and Saturn are constantly talking to each other. And the reason is that the moon represents gestation processes, pregnancy, processing, whereas Saturn represents maturity, ripeness, coming out of the womb and being complete. So here are some illustrations, right, about Saturn. This is an example of a fellow who was very conservative, or a politician who was advocating for family values and how important it is, that a marriage is between a man and a woman, and we need to be completely loyal to our spouses and build beautiful families, and so all the biblical stuff. And he was a spokesman. He was not just following that and then subscribing to that, but he was an advocate. He was influential in that political agenda. And you see, he has Saturn conjunct Mars to the degree in a sign of Scorpio, which is a sexual sign. Mars is a sexual planet. And you understand that because of this nuance between what is socially, culturally taboo versus what is spiritually aligned, the difference between human-made laws and spiritual laws is in the Saturn. And of course, because of that, wherever you have your Saturn, you're looking for the answers. You don't already have the answers. It's not a done deal. You're not on top of your game. It's not the end of the journey. You are still in process of discovering the rights and wrong. And so in his own internal confusion, he was gay. He was gay, and he was having affair with escorts. Not only that, but he had sex in his office. And he was caught with pants down. Why would Saturn, Mars do that? Not only is Saturn Mars, but his Venus relationships is in Capricorn as well, widely square that Pluto. And so he's exposed and obviously shamed, and he realizes that complexity of Saturn. What is really happening here? What is he guilty of? Is he guilty of being gay? That's one question. From his culture and the value he subscribes to culturally, yes, he is guilty for being gay, but he couldn't fight it. And he ended up, following his urges. And he ended up doing it in a way that really, it's almost like as though he wanted to get caught, like he wasn't careful even. And that's something about Saturn. It's also that natural, unnatural guilt. I feel so guilty that I'm also sabotaging myself. But the real guilt, and if we see here accountability, it's in misleading the public. It's in that double standard. And you see that by transit, when all this blew up, Saturn was in Sagittarius, which is a sign of what are you broadcasting? Practice what you preach. Preaching is Sagittarius. So there's an accountability here for what you say versus what you do. And a similar example, I'm using those because they're so parallel, and I just want to show you these are cherry picked. There's just one example, but it's exactly the same thing. And I'm writing their names so you can Google it and research the whole story. Ralph Shortey is a Utah representative, and he was the head of the Trump campaign in 2016 in Utah. Super conservative, family values, the whole package of what marriage relationship should do. And lo and behold, he is caught in a motel room with a teenager, underage boy. And of course, he tries to get out of it, excuses. And you see again a very tight Mars Saturn. It's a solar chart, so basically the houses go according to the sun. Sun is the indicator of the first house. So it ends up in the 8th house from the sun point of view. Not only that, again, the same Venus in Capricorn, like they have the same Venus at the same degree. And here the Venus squares the Pluto, Saturn, Mars. So you see, when you see that in the chart, you know what? You know this person is going to face moral dilemmas in his relationships. And he's going to be attracted consciously or unconsciously to taboos, because Saturn represents the taboo. Saturn represents, is it really right? Is it really wrong? Who says it's right or wrong? Is it the priest? Is it God? Is it the scriptures? What is my reference? And so he was busted, when again Saturn transit was in Sagittarius around the same time. And of course, Pluto was in the picture and Jupiter, all the activators were there for a perfect storm. Now, this is the other side of Capricorn, and I don't want to be political here. I'm just showing you astrology. But Greta Thunberg, who is herself a heavy Capricorn, with a Pluto Saturn opposition. She's born during that infamous Pluto Saturn opposition in Gemini Sagittarius, which has to do with speech, education, multiculturalism. And you see, what is her nature? You look at her, she has this fierce face of telling Trump that he is a bad boy. So she's holding everybody accountable for their misalignments. And that is something that people with strong Saturn and Capricorn influences will become those who want to hold people accountable. And of course, they have to, first of all, hold themselves accountable, because a typical thing with Capricorn is do as I say, not as I do. Both Saturn and Jupiter have that tendency for self-righteousness. And the reason is because they are the gatekeepers, because they are the law keepers, and they have that high moral responsibility, but they sometimes do not live up to their own standards. But you see that Greta, it goes on strike. I don't know, you probably know her story, but I'll just briefly go through it. She's a high school student. She goes on strike because she feels that her leaders do not do enough for climate and ecological consciousness. And there's, basically a world that gets more and more polluted, and species vanishing and whatnot. So she's going through this Pluto transit, through this Mars retrograde transit, and Saturn just entered Capricorn by transit. And she says, leaders need to be accountable. So we, the public, and that's a typical Saturn in Capricorn thing. When Saturn is in the other signs, the leaders tell you where you're doing things wrong. But when Saturn is in Capricorn, the leaders are tested. The leaders are made accountable. And they are on trial. And that's what she did. And of course, through this was the beginning. She goes on strike, and then she gains attention, media attention, and she becomes this spokesperson, this voice of the next generation that does not want to tolerate the neglect, the greed, and the unconscious behavior. And this whole thing happens as Saturn transits her Capricorn planets, and Saturn Pluto come together on her moon. So you understand what? She becomes the person of the year, Time magazine, and she gets all these recognition and credibility and positive feedback through a Saturn transit. As Saturn is on her moon with Pluto, you'd think, oh my God, you're going to face some kind of disaster, she actually ends up on the cover of Time magazine. Why? Because she was in alignment. Because her message was recognized. At least it was recognized, in our time. It was an important message for the context of where we're at. And now, because of all this, she's going to be accountable herself for the rest of her life. And if she is transgressing, and suddenly, you're going to hear 10 years from now, Greta is accepting bribe from Monsanto to whatever, keep things under wraps, she's immediately going to face karmic retribution and be grilled and exposed and so forth. So what do I want you to retain from this is that Saturn is not about making you suffer or not. It's about understanding your life is not just about you. And it's about understanding that learning process and realizing we are part of something larger. And if we align our ego, we don't need to destroy our ego. We don't need to, self-efface. We just need to learn as we go the rights and wrong, rectify our behavior, forgive ourselves, and not repeat the mistakes. So, that's interestingly, I talked about her scolding Trump. Look where her Saturn is, right on his sun, north node, moon.